quick business update for week beginning of 19th of October 2020. We're going to go through some different industries and I'll talk to you about spec links as well. Let's start off with airlines. As you can guess, the airline industry, the travel industry as a whole has really been hit by COVID. Flybe is recently being rescued by a previous shareholder, so that's great news for them. They are expected to be up and running next year. And just so you know a little bit about Flybe, they have 40% of the regional kind of flights market. So they have 8 million passengers a year, but they have very small profit margins because of those kind of short haul flights. So they're currently looking at licensing agreements and should be back up and running with a slightly different offer next year. It'll be interesting to see what that is. British Airways, like every other airline, is struggling. They're only expected to have 30% of their normal flights running. IAG, which owns them, but also owns Aer Lingus and Iberia, has a £1.17 billion loss for the period from July to September. Bearing in mind that that should be their busiest period for summer holidays, etc., they're reporting a loss. So that's going to come as quite a big shake-up to the company. Virgin Holidays have recently been ordered to meet their deadlines for refunds. So I think holiday packages have a refund deadline of 14 days, which they have been failing to meet. They've had 53,000 refunds to make. So refund requests totaling 203 million. Okay, so again, a massive impact on the company. It'll be interesting to see. It's inevitable that after this, they'll have to restructure in some way and plug that gap. It'll also be really interesting because they've just announced this week that Heathrow has its quick testing facilities and what impact that will have on the airlines and the travel industry as a whole. Is coming up to half term, so it'll be interesting to see how many people kind of book a last minute getaway. Retail then, John Lewis is scrapping after nearly 100 years, scrapping its never knowingly undersold strapline because of the way that people shop. I just don't feel like they can compete on that kind of price anymore. They're having a radical overhaul, so they're really looking at expanding into the kind of DIY, kind of garden products, homeware area that people are investing a lot in during lockdown and moving away from their women's wear, which would traditionally make them the bulk of their money. Is also looking at allowing customers to rent items, which I think is going to be really interesting. What items are going to be put on rent. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds, bearing in mind that it's had quite poor performance recently. The final thing to note with retail is that credit card costs are rising, and it'll be interesting to see the impact of that. Some retailers are threatening that they're going to have to pass this cost on to customers. That's obviously a really dangerous game at the moment, with retail really suffering. And therefore, I think it'll be interesting to see what other formats people take in terms of payment, or whether they encourage people to do, I don't know, Apple Pay or just pay through debit cards. So keep your eyes open for that. Some good news on the high street though. I think I mentioned in a previous video, Geek Retreat, which is all about kind of board games and card games and gaming and hobbies and stuff like that, are opening 100 new stores. They've currently only got 14, but the craft and hobbies market is worth 8 billion and has grown during COVID. And British retail sales have grown for the 5th consecutive month now, boosted by non-food and DIY and garden items. People are doing up their homes, they're making home offices, for instance, they're doing up their gardens because that's where they are spending the predominant amount of time. So that places like B&Q are doing exceptionally well. And so it'll be interesting to see how that folds out, and whether the supermarkets and the retailers, like we've spoken about with John Lewis, whether they try and kind of eat some of that market up. Supermarkets then. So far, we've talked about retail, and in my slides you'll be able to see the spec links that I've put in as well to your A Level spec, that you should be able to link some of this news to. Supermarkets, basically a lot of them are competing on price. And so Waitrose has announced that it's going to be reducing a lot of its prices. and they're not going to compromise on quality. What is interesting though is, are they setting a precedent? Surely that will make customers ask the question, well, why couldn't you always offer these products at a lower price? And will it affect their market positioning? They've probably been less affected by the likes of Aldi and Lidl because they are just on the other side of the spectrum. You know, they're more of a kind of luxury supermarket as opposed to Aldi and Lidl. As they start competing on price now, surely they're not going to be able to do very well in comparison to those well-established businesses such as Aldi and Lidl. So it'll be interesting to see. Co-op is also coming out with the same pledge where it's investing 50 million to lower prices on 300 different branded items and own brand items as well. Again, is that going to help them compete with Aldi and Lidl? We'll have to wait and see. Asda's doing something slightly different. It's going down the greener route, the more kind of sustainable route, and has a greener price promise that it's advertised. It's trialling it in stores near its head office at the moment, where loose products, so fruit and veg, will not cost any more than packaged products. So they're trying to encourage people to, you know, kind of buy loose products or bring their own tins and jars and buy loose food, essentially. Much like greengrocers used to do, you know, many moons ago, and be more sustainable. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. In terms of manufacturing, I can talk about Tesla. They've recorded a 5th quarter in a row of profit, so they're doing really well. If you've been following Tesla, the biggest problem for Tesla has been manufacturing and meeting its orders, which it is doing. What was really interesting is it now, because it's able to meet its orders a lot more, its share prices have rocketed, and I spoke about that in a previous video, I think. So its share prices have kind of shot through the roof, which now makes it the highest market value car maker in the world, which is astonishing seeing as it's such a new player compared to the likes of Ford or Toyota, etc. So it's doing exceptionally well in terms of market value, but shareholders are still not excited because it's been through such a long period where it didn't make them any profits. They want to see if this is sustainable. The other issue is that a lot of other companies are catching up. So Volkswagen, Toyota, with their own kind of electric cars. And so Tesla has unveiled plans to start producing its own batteries so it can start competing on performance and not just the fact that it is an electric car. So that'll be interesting. Again, it's really kind of taken advantage of its first mover advantage, but it's not been able to produce quick enough. So this can link to your supply chain management, your manufacturing and operations, and also first mover advantage. Hospitality then, Domino's, KFC are all employing 5,000 plus employees in the UK and Ireland. Takeaways are doing very, very well. KFC are kind of putting a social element to that, their kind of corporate social responsibility. You can link into that, where they're really targeting those 16 to 24-year-olds as part of their Kickstart program, because they are the age group that has been most hit by redundancies and job losses during COVID. So they're really trying to tap into that. You know, essentially it's brilliant for them because they've got a workforce out there that are eager to work but have lost their jobs, and they can tap into that. The company behind Wetherspoons, Harvester and All Bar One. Wetherspoons, as I mentioned in my previous video, have reported a loss, I think, for the first time since the 1980s. So the company behind them, Harvester and All Bar One, on the other hand, are making redundancies because they very much rely on people coming into their spaces and enjoying a drink or food with them. Tech and media, Instagram is under investigation for releasing information about under 18-year-olds, behavioural information about under 18-year-olds, and is being investigated by the EU. So some legal factors you can link in there. Zoom's revenue has quadrupled, as you'd imagine, since the start of the pandemic. And ITV has now come out and said it's really going to focus on its streaming service. If you look at BBC Online, it's a lot more popular. Netflix is certainly more popular, and ITV is now starting to move into that space. Finally, banking and finance. From the Black Lives Matter movement, NatWest has now pledged to increase the number of staff from BAME backgrounds. And again, you can link that to your corporate social responsibility, your recruitment and HR and representation, and talk about them as a company that's trying to be more proactive to make sure that there's representation amongst their workforce.